Hi and welcome to the second part of my challenge in which I color a page in Magische Reise or Magical Worlds by Johanna Basford using only watercolors. If you're new to this channel, hi, my name is Ina. If not, welcome back. If you haven't seen the first part yet, feel free to check it out because I won't repeat everything I did there again. I'm starting now with all the greenery, specifically the treetop. For that, I'm using a lighter green and first color the entire area in one complete layer. While this first layer dries, I'll move on to the smaller areas. I'm coloring right over the individual leaves that are drawn in for now. Both treetops will get a complete light first layer, and later I'll build on that to add depth. I'll also try to create a bit of a leaf texture. Since the area I've colored is quite large, I clip the corners again so the page doesn't warp too much. Next, I move on to the hills around the castle. They also get a first green layer. The leaves of the vines and other small leaves also receive an initial coat with a light green. In between, I consider which leaves I want to color in this green and which ones I'll use a different shade for. The individual plants should stand out from each other, which is why I use different shades of green. Next, I mixed a bit of yellow into my existing green. And since I liked the color so much, I colored most of the other leaves with it. I had actually planned to use the green from the outer areas for the leaves in the middle, but then I changed my mind. This yellowish green also draws the viewer's eye nicely towards the center of the image. Now I used the yellow that I still had left on the palette, which is a bit warmer than the one I mixed into the green. With this yellow I color the castle windows, as well as the fish and the bird's beaks. Then I color the first layer from the blossom in orange. Later, it will get some more depth with some pink and yellow. Now I switch to a smaller brush for the details and use a dark green for the wine. Anyone who saw the last video knows that this paper in the German version of Magical Worlds doesn't really like water. That's why I generally use as little water as possible. But especially for the small areas, it's even more important to use very, very little water. So the paint doesn't run and you keep maximum control over the color. I'm now also using the dark green for these large leaves by the pond. And I try to start at the top of the leaf and let the color gradually become lighter towards the tip. Now I take a minimal amount of black and mix it into the dark green to color the stones in the water. Here too, I start with an even layer first. Then I use a light shade of purple to define the birds a bit more, simply mixing together a few leftover colors from the palette. The bird's beaks also get a bit more color. And then I move on to the fish, which now gets a few more details in orange. I color the middle part of the blossom pink. And here as well, I work in several layers. I make the outer part of the blossom slightly yellowish, and then the middle part of the blossom gets darkened a bit more. Now that all the large green areas have dried, they also get a bit more depth by dabbing from the shadowed area towards the highlights, slightly darkening the sections. I'm careful not to go all the way to the edge, so a highlight remains there. and the dabbing motion creates a bit of a leaf texture. Then I darken the base of all the small leaves a little. For that, I simply use the same color again, and through layering it becomes darker. I do the same for the leaves that rise out of the water, as well as the remaining leaves I previously colored with this green. For the leaves that are half drawn with dashed lines, I make the entire dashed half a bit darker. And then I continue with the dabbing movements on the bushes. Now I basically do the same thing again, but this time the area where I applied the color is a bit smaller than in the previous round. I also darken the shadow areas of the bushes in the background once more. But again, I make sure the area I color is smaller than the one I colored before. I apply it all using dabbing movements. This way, the bushes gradually gain more depth and detail, layer by layer. Now the stones receive their second layer as well, which means I darken them a bit more in the lower area. Next, I use the same technique on the yellow-green leaves. I deliberately let the treetop dry for an extra long time, because it's the largest area in the picture, and therefore also the one where I use the most moisture in total. You can clearly see how the leaves are already gaining more definition and depth with the second layer. Here too, I make sure not to color over the entire area, but only the parts that should be darker, leaving the highlight visible. Since I really used very little water and the small areas dry relatively quickly, I can start directly with a third layer once I had finished all the leaves. Now, finally, I can begin with the second layer of the treetop. And here as well, I make dabbing movements and leave the outer area free as a highlight. This is really where you can see the advantage of watercolors over colored pencils. Because with these dabbing motions, you can very quickly create a leaf texture, which would be very time consuming with colored pencils. I color the drawn-in leaves the same way I did with the leaves further down. And with the dabbing movements, I make sure to dab around the leaves and not over them. For the deep shadow areas where the branches reach into the treetop, I now use the darker green that I already used for the vines. I also use this color around the individual leaves so that they stand out better. Perhaps instead I should have added another layer of the lighter green there, so it wouldn't be quite as dark. But now it is as it is, and that's okay. In the lower area, I now add a few more of the leaves that I wanted to let extend over the leaves of the blossom. Then I let the whole thing dry thoroughly again. And just like in the first part, I will now use my Posca marker again at the end, along with some gel pens. In the sky, I added a few cross-shaped stars to make it a bit more interesting. And then I cover all the lines in the water with my white Posca marker. Theoretically, you could also use white gouache paint for this, if you want to completely avoid pens. I don't have any at the moment, so I'm using the white Posca marker. Then I use my Pentel Hybrid gel pen in gold for the details in the blossom. Next, I use a silver gel pen from Avec for a few details on the birds. After that, I also use a pastel green gel pen from Avec for the line around one of the leaves. It's not very visible, but just a little bit. And finally, I use a yellow glitter gel pen for the blossoms I painted there. I still don't like them 100%, but that's not too bad. Here you can now see the finished page up close. And I must say I'm very pleased with the first page, which I colored entirely with watercolors, apart from a Posca marker and gel pens. If you have an idea for another challenge you would like to see on my channel, feel free to write it in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye and see you next time.